Welcome to this explainer. Okay, I am so excited to get into this one today because we are going to unpack something truly mind-bending. We tend to assume that modern manipulation, things like viral fake news and echo chambers, are all brand new inventions, right? Cooked up by tech giants in Silicon Valley. But what if I told you that the underlying architecture of your social media feed is actually thousands of years old? Today we're going to trace the incredibly fascinating evolution of manipulation. As you'll see, modern tech isn't inventing new tricks. It's just perfecting some very, very ancient ones.
So, let's kick things off with the pretty massive question. Did Silicon Valley actually invent the algorithms that keep you endlessly scrolling, or did they just figure out how to automate the exact same manipulation tactics that Roman Caesars and medieval kings used to control the masses? By the end of this explainer, I promise you're going to look at your smartphone in a completely different light.
All right, part 1. The illusion of control and entertainment.
If we rewind the clock about 2,000 years, it is wild to see how the Roman Colosseum functioned almost exactly like a modern social media feed. Think about it. The Roman state had this massive problem. They had millions of citizens, zero internet, and this constant looming threat of rebellion. So instead of putting a soldier on every street corner, they turned architecture into media. When 50,000 people sat packed in the Colosseum, their attention was entirely captured and directed to a single focal point. They were perfectly synchronized, consuming the exact same visceral, high-stakes content at the exact same millisecond.
And honestly, this is basically the ancient origin story of cancel culture. Your average Roman citizen had absolutely zero real political power in their day-to-day lives. But in the arena, the emperor actually delegated the power of life and death directly to them. A simple thumbs down literally meant execution. Now, this gave the masses a ridiculously powerful illusion of choice. By participating in this shared violence, the crowd essentially became willing accomplices to the state. Their loyalty wasn't secured by strict laws, but by an engineered feeling of control.
But wait, what about the millions of Romans who couldn't literally fit inside the arena? Well, they used the denarius. Roman coins were essentially the ancient equivalent of Twitter. Julius Caesar was the first guy to stamp his own living profile onto a coin. After that, anytime an emperor shifted a policy or won a big battle, they just mint new coins featuring their face right next to a short, super catchy slogan. It was literally an ancient hashtag, like Pax Romana. Every single time you bought a loaf of bread, you were essentially retweeting the emperor's political message across the empire.
Which brings us to part 2, the medieval propaganda network.
So Rome eventually falls, right? But the need to control the public? Yeah, that definitely didn't go away. To really grasp the absolute power the medieval Catholic Church held, let's look at a modern comparison. Back in 2021, Amazon AWS basically wiped the social network Parler off the internet in a matter of hours, just by cutting off their servers. Because if you control the foundational infrastructure, you control everything. The medieval church held that exact same monopoly, except theirs was over the basic infrastructure of truth and salvation. If someone stepped out of line, the church didn't just disagree with them, they hit the ultimate delete button by excommunicating them, or worse.
So how did a network like that get off the ground in the first place? It really comes down to a concept called cellular proselytism. Rather than some huge top-down broadcast, an idea is seeded into a small, tight-knit group, a cell. Because the information is coming from a trusted peer, our natural critical thinking just plummets. This operates exactly like a totally unhinged viral rumor spreading through your family's WhatsApp group chat today. You might ignore a politician on TV, but you are definitely going to listen to your cousin.
Now, back when early Christians were still being heavily persecuted, they obviously needed a safe way to scale this network. Enter the ichthyes, or the Jesus fish. This was an absolutely brilliant piece of early cryptography. Picture this. One person casually draws a curved line in the dirt. If the other person is an insider, they complete the fish with a second arc. To Roman guards walking by, it's just a meaningless doodle in the sand. But to the network, it was a secret, offline password and a highly recognizable logo.
Once the church actually secured power, they had to figure out how to keep people coming back. And their solution? Basically, medieval virtual reality. They specifically designed Gothic cathedrals with these massive 40-meter-high vaulted ceilings to make the individual feel completely insignificant. They used stained glass to filter in lux nova, this unnatural, eerie light that literally induced a trance state. And as you walked out, you'd look up and see these terrifying body horror sculptures of the Last Judgment. The fear of hell was basically their metric for guaranteed weekly user retention.
And right in the center of all that overwhelming architecture was the ultimate information node, the priest's pulpit.
Think of this as the only authorized, mandatory weekly podcast in existence. Every Sunday, the local priest delivered the news, dictated social norms, and completely framed the political reality for every peasant in the village. It was a flawless, perfectly sealed echo chamber.
This network's sheer power was truly put to the test in the year 1095, when Pope Urban II needed to mobilize tens of thousands of men for the Crusades. And get this, he didn't use complex theology. Instead, he went straight for pure shock content. He utilized incredibly explicit, highly detailed fake news about the torture of pilgrims to bypass people's critical thinking and just enrage the masses. And he capped the whole thing off with an insanely viral slogan, Deus Vult, or God wills it. It was a masterclass in weaponized outrage. All right, moving on to part 3, the printing press taking on the system.
Because, as we know, information monopolies never last forever. Enter Johannes Gutenberg. When his printing press hit the scene, it acted exactly like WikiLeaks mirror servers do today. For centuries, if the church wanted to suppress a dangerous idea, they just burned the author and tossed their handwritten manuscript into the fire. Problem solved. But the printing press, it allowed for rapid duplication. Once those pamphlets were copied and distributed by the hundreds, the state's metaphorical delete button was useless. The monopoly on truth was officially shattered by Control-C, Control-V.
And Martin Luther was completely all over this new tech. Knowing most of the public couldn't read, he actually hired an artist to create what were essentially the world's very first political memes. He distributed these woodcuts, showing devastating side-by-side comparisons. On one side, you have Jesus humbly washing the feet of the poor, and on the other side, the Pope demanding that people kiss his luxury shoes. It was visually striking, impossible to misunderstand, and it was completely devastating to the Vatican's reputation.
Suddenly, kings and monarchs are panicking. They are under attack from unauthorized information. To protect himself, King Louis IV built a literal physical echo chamber, the Palace of Versailles. He forced the elites to live there and exhausted them with endless, ridiculous etiquette, so they literally had no time left to plot against him. Meanwhile, down on the streets, anonymous pamphlets called Mazarinades were functioning just like modern, untraceable telegram channels. To fight back, the state deployed spies to places like the Krakow Tree in Paris to manually eavesdrop and harvest early big data on public rumors.
Let's jump into part 4, the birth of fake news.
As we move into the era of mass media and nation-states, manipulation evolves from religious dogma into a highly calculated science. Take the famous Boston Massacre of 1770. Paul Revere didn't just report the news, he literally photoshopped reality with his famous engraving. He intentionally erased the clubs and the ice chunks that the colonists were throwing, depicting them instead as totally innocent, unarmed victims being slaughtered by an organized firing squad. He even changed the race of a key victim just to better appeal to the wealthy white landowners he needed to mobilize. Pure, calculated visual manipulation.
Speaking of the American Revolution, Benjamin Franklin was literally a genius at this kind of thing. During peace negotiations, he needed to completely destroy British diplomatic credibility. So what does he do? He forges an entire newspaper supplement claiming that Allied Native Americans had sent the British king a bag of scalps. Franklin realized that if you wrap an absurd lie in super specific, fabricated data, breaking the casualties down into precise numbers of farmers, boys, girls, and infants, the public will just accept the whole thing as an undisputed fact.
Meanwhile, over in France, Napoleon Bonaparte was busy perfecting that illusion of choice we talked about earlier. He knew that ruling by pure, brute force was a bad look, so he just rigged his own elections. To make himself consul for life, his administration straight up fabricated the results, officially claiming 3.5 million yes votes against a measly 8,500 no votes. He managed to drape a military dictatorship in the perfectly manicured illusion of democratic consent.
Which finally brings us to part 5, automating ancient manipulations.
Let's pull this all together into the digital age. The core tactics of psychological manipulation, they haven't actually changed, but the velocity absolutely has. We've gone from propaganda taking weeks to travel across an empire via Roman coins, to days via the printing press, to hours via the telegraph, to literal milliseconds on the internet. The speed is unprecedented, sure, but the human vulnerabilities being targeted, those are ancient.
Because here is the wild part. Modern algorithms didn't actually invent anything new. They just automated these 3 ancient triggers.
Step 1. Prioritize fear and anger, exactly like the Roman arena keeping the crowd hooked on violence. Step 2. Create comfortable echo chambers, perfectly mimicking the medieval priest who controlled your entire worldview. Step 3. Demonize the other, borrowing the classic state tactic of uniting people through a shared hatred of barbarians or heretics. Silicon Valley literally just took human history and coded it directly into your smartphone.
Which brings us right back to you watching this explainer today. I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on. What is genuinely more dangerous? A state openly forcing you into a public square to witness an execution, or an algorithm silently stealing your time, your focus, and your emotions while you sit comfortably on your own couch? The next time you feel that irresistible urge to just keep scrolling, take a second and ask yourself, are you truly in control of your feed, or are you just the newest player in an automated 2,000-year-old game? Thank you so much for joining me to unpack all of this, and stay curious.